Welcome back to some new petty revenge stories, where people get small victories over those that wronged them. I hope you had a great day. The first story is called Quitting a Bad Job. I worked for a company as the opener for 4 years, and unfortunately my cool boss had to sell the location to this douche. After months of the new management talking down to us, being petty and making promises they couldn't keep, I decided that it was my time to leave the company. Right before I left, the new owners got a new TV provider, which meant the one remote that worked on all 6 TVs turned into 6 individual remotes. So one morning I went in for my scheduled shift at 4:30 AM. I printed out my lengthy resignation letter that detailed how awful the new ownership was. I then went into the AV room and ripped off all the labels from the remotes. I then took all the keys, removed their labels and put them all in the same box so you couldn't tell what key was what. I also took a secret pair of keys that only a few of us knew about and hid them all around the facility. I then took a dry erase marker and wrote all over the facility's mirrors, "I'll miss you," so that my clients knew I was done. I locked the front doors, ran out the back and left before the facility opened. I blocked the new ownership's phone numbers so they couldn't contact me. I made my reason for leaving very clear in my detailed resignation. I later received a call from an unknown number. It was the owners saying they were gonna get the police involved for vandalism and slander if I didn't delete my post. I wrote a Facebook post informing my members that I was leaving. The owners were so upset they used their daughter's Instagram page to stalk me for days. They still watch my Instagram stories from the company's page. It's been over a year. The next story is called Fired for Karens. Back in the Stone Age, known as the 80s, when Karen was just a pretty name, 8 proto-Karens went out for lunch at an upscale restaurant. They had a wonderful time at their lunch, sending their waitress Mindy skirring for more of this and a side of that, snapping their fingers for more coffee. Now, Mindy kept her cool and served them courteously and efficiently, but the Karens were never satisfied and kept asking more of her. You know the type. At the end of the 2-hour stay, the lady's bill came to $200. They paid, then handed Mindy a $5 tip. Mindy stayed calm and handed the tip back. With dignity, she explained, "I can't accept this. It is an insult to my service." Being proto-Karens, of course, they complained to the owner, who fired Mindy on the spot. Right there in front of the smirking customers and the whole restaurant. A regular customer, a local executive, was dining there at the time and saw the whole thing unfold. He was livid about how his favorite hardworking server was treated. He did 2 things after that. First, he paid his own bill and assured the owner he would be sharing the story about how Mindy was treated around the local business community. Second, he walked Mindy out and offered her a job. The young executive was my dad, and Mindy ended up working for him for the next 20 years in his firm. Mom loved her, and Mindy was like an extra grandma to me, and the restaurant lost a ton of business for it. The third story is called Fired While Pregnant. At the time I was working 2 jobs at the same nursing home while pregnant. I did physical therapy from 9 to 5 and then was a CNA from 5 to 10:30 PM. My workload was getting crazy and I was strained with my 12-hour shift. I had let the facility know that I wanted to stop doing my extra CNA shifts while pregnant and continue to do my 9 to 5 physical therapy position. From my understanding, HR was completely okay with this, so I signed the paperwork. The next day, I got a call from the director of nursing, saying how she was so sad that I had quit my job and best of luck in the future. I was taken aback for a minute. I told her there must be a mistake, as I only stopped doing extra shifts for the rest of my pregnancy. She then proceeded to tell me that no, I had quit working there altogether. I was so upset. There was nothing I could do or say to get my job back. I took it as retaliation that I made them sort a staff member for aid work, and so she fired me from the whole company. While I was working there, I found out that the director of nursing didn't actually have any license to run the facility. So I called the health department and basically told them about it. When I went in the next couple of days to get my paycheck, I found out she had resigned until she got the appropriate certification to continue her job. I was still mad about being fired, but she also lost her job, so it made me feel good. The next story is called Don't Need a Manager. I used to work for a pizza place. The owners of the restaurant also owned 7 or 8 other pizza places. When I first started working there, I was still in college and got hired part-time as waitstaff. The place had an awesome manager and assistant manager who totally completed one another and kept the place running tight and smooth. It was a pretty fun place to work, and they gave a decent amount of free food to people who worked there. I spent 4 years working there and worked my way up through literally every position: waitstaff, cook, shift leader and assistant manager. We kept the same manager and district manager, who was a jerk but very efficient at his job, and the place kept on humming along. By this time I'm placing orders, doing inventory and doing payroll and sales, so I know the place is profitable. The owner got married and the new couple went to a bunch of business conferences. You know the ones, where you and you and you can achieve your dreams, but opportunities are limited, so invest early. Suddenly, all of our expenses and sales are getting scrutinized. All of the managers and district management are getting grilled on their decisions and effectiveness. The manager and assistant managers who had an arrangement on who worked when suddenly needed to open and close all the time. It was clear that the owners were trying to flex on us. It didn't take long for the district manager and main assistant manager to leave. This was followed by a string of incompetent new managers that the owners brought in. One of them harassed all the employees. The next was stealing employee overtime pay. They actually liked him, but he was also stealing from them, so another new manager was brought in. I stuck it out as long as I could and eventually took over as interim manager after the previous manager got busted selling substances out of the restaurant. The owners couldn't make it to the restaurant for half a week and I just jumped in and got everything done. And I stayed on my current hourly wage, working 55 hours weeks for 2 months before they sat down to talk salary. Anyhow, they offered me an insulting amount, 15k in the 90s, when I was currently making close to 30k hourly at $6 something an hour. They also insisted on the owner's husband shadowing me for a week to show me how to do the job properly, and he made everything take longer without making anything better. At the end of that week, I told him I couldn't do 15k and that he and the owner could have 2 weeks to talk about it, but I planned on leaving after that. And he was so absent-minded and condescending about it, like it wasn't a big deal, just another thing on his checklist. By now, they had sold 3 of their stores. The owner's husband was basically spending a week at each store before moving on to the next, just getting in the way, and he was in a hurry to leave. He very much implied that I wouldn't get much if any raise, so I kept doing everything I was supposed to, but some things I didn't do quite properly. Like I still did inventory and ordered appropriately, but I kept my records in a new notebook instead of the proper one. Same with payroll. During that whole 2 weeks, the only time I heard from the owner or her husband was when he called and asked me to schedule an oven cleaning night so he could see how that worked, but no mention of my raise. So I scheduled the oven cleaning for the night immediately following my last day. At the end of 2 weeks, I still hadn't heard from him. So I took my inventories and payrolls home the night before and worked my final shift, waiting for him to arrive for the oven cleaning. When he did, I asked him whether his wife had an answer about my salary, and he blanked. He'd completely forgotten to ask. So I handed over my keys and told him good luck, and I walked out. He and his wife called me frantically that night, but again, absolutely no mention of a raise, just going off on me for disappointing them. Later, I got calls asking about paperwork, and I always told them a perfectly logical place where it should be, but of course it wasn't there. And I was the last person at the pizza place who knew how to clean the oven, so I also got calls about that. I mentioned there was a manual somewhere, and again suggested obvious places to look for it when there was no such manual. I offered to explain it to them over the phone, then immediately started droning on about safety protocols. They asked me to write it down, and I said sure, and I'll try to drop that off in a day or 2. And I scheduled everyone for the week after, but I didn't post it, just sent each person home with their individual schedule. I kept the paperwork, just in case there were legal issues, but there weren't. I managed to stretch out the idea that there was elusive paperwork to be found somewhere in that restaurant for almost 3 weeks before they stopped calling me. Without the paperwork, they had no real way to properly order anything, and they were forced to do an emergency inventory. There wasn't anyone else there who knew how to do these things either, so the owner and her husband got to experience a crash course in emergency restaurant management, and the oven broke down a few months later. The 5th story is called Didn't See That Coming. This happened about 15 years ago and my first job. I was 16 years old, in high school and working 60 plus hours per week at a restaurant. I started out as part-time, but was the only person willing to close the restaurant, so I worked 7 nights a week, 9ish hours per night, while still in high school. The way the management team was made up was 1 general manager and 3 assistant managers. All of the management, and even other staff, liked me, and I never had any issues at all. But there was 1 assistant manager who had it out for me for some reason. We will call her Carol. One Saturday night there was a rodeo going on in town, so I knew that we would get a rush around 10, as we were the only place open that late in town. I told management the day before, as it takes many hours for the roast beef to cook, and they usually cook them overnight. Carol was supposed to cook extra roast beef, but failed to do so. Saturday night comes and we get a huge rush around 10:30, 30 minutes before closing. There were 3 of us there, the cook, the manager and me. They are both making the food while I'm running the drive-thru, front counter and bagging the food myself. We ended up running out of roast beef. Instead of no longer taking orders, Carol decides she's going to cook the roast beef in the microwave, and she says this loud enough for customers to hear. Now I've got people asking for refunds, and the manager is the only one that can issue refunds. After about the 5th time of me asking her to give someone a refund, she yells at me in front of about 50 customers. She tells me that if I can't do my job without her help, then I could just leave and not come back. Here's where the Patty comes in. The cook and I had a very good friendship. She was a 50-something-year-old woman, and I was a 16-year-old boy, but we got along great. I ended up talking her into quitting, but we still took care of the customers before leaving the manager there by herself to close the store. I called the GM to let her know what happened, and she asked me and the cook to stay and wait for her to get there. When the GM gets there and is asking us about what happened, I looked at her and said, "Why don't you call your son and ask him? He was in the lobby the whole time." Carol's face went white. The GM talks to her son, comes back and sends Carol home and asks me and the cook to stay and close. The next day I learned that Carol had been fired and had requested that someone bring her personal items to her, as she didn't want to come to the store. The cook and I graciously volunteered to take her things to her. She wouldn't even answer her door. We just left her things on her porch and went about our business. I have seen Carol several times since this, and she still won't speak to me. The last story is called Coworkers' Revenge. Back when I first started in my industry, a friend of mine from uni landed a job at my company too. The place was 4 levels with an atrium in the middle. I was on the 3rd floor and he was on the 1st floor, but I could see him from my desk. He didn't notice yet, and he didn't know where I was seated. I let him get settled in for the morning, then I anonymously messaged him on our internal messaging system. "Meet me at my office immediately." I watched as he looked slightly panicked, looking around the office. Then he replies, "Sorry, who is this? And can I ask where your office is? I don't have time for this." He started to look really panicked, then got up and walked into the atrium, turning around in circles, looking at the offices. I felt bad about it now, and waved down to him saying, "Now." Being the good-hearted guy he was, he laughed, and I went back to work giggling. A few days later, I started hearing a very occasional and very high-pitched beep in the office I shared with 2 others. It was very subtle, almost out of our hearing spectrum, to the point where you weren't sure if you were hearing it. But once I did accept I really was hearing it, it became more and more noticeable with each beep, and more irritating. The timing was unpredictable, so I let it go for quite a while before I started to accept I might be going mad, and asked the others if they heard it. They both looked almost relieved and said they had, and it was driving them mad too. We started looking around the office, pulling shelves apart, emptying drawers, pulling pictures down. I even sat outside the office for a few hours to make sure it wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't. We also timed the beeps all day to see if we could find a pattern. No pattern. It seemed completely random. The following day we got serious and started pulling apart our PCs one at a time. We were all looking a bit wild-eyed by this point. Eventually, my friend arrived at the office, laughing at us sitting on the floor with our PCs in pieces. He told us he'd taped the small evil noise device under a shelf. He said he would have left it longer, but our boss thought it had gone on long enough. Touché. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. And now, I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.